All right, well, my clock here says noon, so we are going to get started. Welcome to Winning Nonprofit Responses in Turbulent Times, a conversation being co-hosted by Conlon Public Strategies and Loyola's Baumhart Center for Social Enterprise and Responsibility. It is truly a pleasure and honor to welcome all of you, and we look forward to the discussion ahead. My name is Seth Green, and on an afternoon like this one, I'm especially proud to say that I'm the founding director of the Baumhart Center here at Loyola. And I will just share a little bit about our agenda and a little bit about our center before turning it over to our partners at Conlon Public Strategies. So we're going to have Kevin share leadership in turbulent times and provide a strategic overview. And then we're going to move into what we see as two major areas that are leading nonprofits through change. One is COVID-19, and we're going to hear from Lyndon and Diamond Shapiro, and then we're going to look into these case studies from Aunt Martha's and Joel Hall dancers. And then we're going to move on to an issue that is more than 400 years old in our country, but that is finally being reckoned with in a new way, which is how do we stand for racial justice? And so we're going to hear from Barbara Lumpkin and then again come back to Raul Garza and Jacqueline Sinclair from Aunt Martha's and Joe Hall Dancers. We're truly grateful to all of our partners in this work. The quick context on our center for those who are joining us with new eyes to what we do is that we look at the intersection of business strategy and social purpose. And we are proud to do that at Loyola, a school that has been rated among the top 4 in the world by the Financial Times for social purpose and business education. One example of how we prepare leaders for impact is we have the first MBA in the country that is fully at the intersection of profit and purpose. And it is designed for private, public, and social sector leaders who truly want to use business strategy to accelerate impact in the world. With that, let me turn it over to our partner, Kevin Conlon, to share an overview on turbulent times.
Thank you, Seth. Congratulations on the terrific work of the Baumhart Center. Our firm started about 20 years ago, and our focus has traditionally been on not-for-profits and organizations that share our commitment to good business, good policies, and strong communities. Our objective is the same, to help the client reach their goal and help them build capacity, therefore leaving them stronger. My frame of reference has been I was always involved with politics, and have held office many years, and have run a lot of campaigns. So throughout our history, we've always approached everything as a campaign and brought a campaign style approach. So whether it's issue advocacy or fundraising, we believe a campaign strategy is the best approach. We like the intensity, the focus, the oneness of purpose that comes with the campaign style. And that's been our frame of reference from day one. Now, most of folks probably have associated with our firm traditionally with government relations, which has been what we've traditionally done. But COVID-19, as I was sitting in my basement late March, trying to do as much as I could to help our clients, made me realize that we needed a new set of tools. Our clients needed more. Things were changing. So I put together some additional folks on the team, bringing in a former bank president, bringing in a skilled fundraiser because there was so much opportunity. Every not-for-profit was canceling their event, struggling. There was also a new opportunity as far as grant opportunities. And I wanted our clients to be able to access every opportunity. We also brought in a really seasoned DC lobbyist because nothing was happening in Springfield, as you'll remember. They were pretty much home, but the action was in the CARES bill and the PPP. And then Barbara, who you're going to hear from later, with just a tremendous background in government and finance. So you're going to hear from the other panelists about how they have very skillfully and gracefully navigated this terrible time we're going through. What I want to talk about briefly is what I consider one of the things that we take most pride in, and that's helping organizations cultivate a broad network of strong relationships in multiple sectors. Perhaps more than anything else, that's what we do: connect, build relationships for our clients to reach their goals and to raise our profile. In the last 12 years, not-for-profits in Illinois, it's just been unbelievable what we've had to go through. the crash of 2008. We had the 22 months without a budget. And then on top of all this, COVID. Here in a city that is crippled with racial and economic disparity, all these great challenges. And what we have learned is having these strong relationships in place often make the difference of doing well or really adding value and helping your clients during this time. So for example, we know that banks were eligible for PPP. I mean, if you were an organization with under 500 employees, you were eligible for PPP. But if you had a relationship with your banker, you could get that done a lot faster. And that pre-existing relationship was often the difference between organizations getting money in April or in August. And sadly, as organizations, you're going to have to plan for this. Every organization is going to need a list of donors, friends, and board members that they can go to in a crisis. They have to consciously plan. If the roof caves in and I need to get some donations, who do I call? Who can help me? What can I do? Now, all this has been really complicated by what we're going through with social distancing and how much difficult it is to build relationships during this time when downtown's empty and you're not at social events like we're all used to going to. So what I'd like to do is just give you a little insight on how I have been trying to do it. So over the years, I've attended way too many political events and usually fundraisers. The traditional fundraiser is people will mingle fun for an hour at a cocktail place, and maybe if you leave, you'll get to say hello to 2-3 people. I used to always think to myself, if I made one new friend, then it was a good use of the evening. Now there's no such thing as a political event, at least in Illinois. People aren't mingling. So what do you do? How do you connect? In my space, what I'm finding, and you just have to be entrepreneurial. So the traditional fundraiser was, as I just described it. A Zoom fundraiser, which is now they're all fundraisers in Illinois are Zoom, is usually 50 people typically with a political person, or it could be a subject matter expert or whatever. But you see the people's name. And what I've been telling our clients to do is you go to these types of events, whether it's political or apolitical, inevitably what's great about it is you see the names, you know who's asking the question. So if someone, for example, asks a question to a senator or a congressperson that I'm at their event and they'll say, Senator, I really appreciate what you're doing for on social justice reform. You have the opportunity the next day, because you know who asked the question, you know what they care about, to send an email and say, it was good to see you at that fundraiser last night. I really appreciated your question on criminal justice reform. I'd like to introduce you to a group that does drug and alcohol treatment, or maybe works with felons, reducing recidivism. And you have to put in that extra effort. But what I want you to think about is the Zoom is in many ways, could be even a better source of connectivity if used in creative ways. Every relationship with someone or organization is a potential board member, a potential fundraiser, or a potential strategic partner. And you have to view every relationship. You have to constantly nurturing, cultivating, looking for a port of entry, a port of connectivity where you can connect. And the best source is always through shared values. About 2 years ago, we had a client that we helped them put together what we call leadership council. It was about 20 some people with every imaginable skill set. Whether it's finance, law, technology, market, you name it, they were on it. They were not board members. They were just like an ancillary board that was wanting to be helpful to the organization and their mission. This was a reservoir of relationships. During the last 6 months, this network has made an incredible difference. Time after time, the CEO has been able to reach out to one of these people on that board and get the help they need. So I'm here to argue that strong relationships foster the grit and resilience organizations need. I encourage all of you to make it a top priority to build and nurture strong relationships. I'm also here to say that our organization, Conlon Public Strategies, is poised to help you navigate this new world whether it's strategic planning, fundraising, board development, building strategic partners, or profile raising. We're here to help you get to the next level as an organization. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin, and thank you for setting the context of the turbulent times. And one of the topics that you named is the COVID pandemic and how that is truly changing both fundraising because of the virtual nature, but even more broadly, the work that we do, the way that we do it. And so we wanted to come to a member of your team, Linda Diamond Shapiro, who has experience advising clients on how to respond to COVID. And I'm going to turn it over to you, Linda, for your top tips, and then we're going to hear about 2 case studies of clients that you've worked with. Linda?
Hi, thank you, Seth. And what I want to do today is really introduce what I've learned from our guests, Raul and Jackie. You know, we're going to be talking today with 2 outstanding CEOs who face very different challenges related to the pandemic. But, you know, interestingly, what they have in common is they have strong organizational cultures you couldn't put a price on. For both, these cultures are grounded in social justice. And, you know, pervasive cultures like theirs really start with strong leadership at the top. So what you'll see today is 2 selfless leaders who have real energy around social justice, and they inspire people. They know how to draw on their culture and their strengths of the organizations. So I just want to start by saying, here's what we saw from them during the pandemic. They never flinched from the challenge. They led with optimism. They kept everyone's eyes on the future by being clear and explicit about their plans. They were ready to be nimble from day one. When you meet Raul Garza, you'll hear that from the very beginning of the pandemic, he and his team set a plan in motion for every aspect of operation, complex organization, and they put these plans in writing for all to see. Under his leadership and with his team, they had to change gears considerably. They had to move a portion of the care they delivered from office-based care to telehealth. Now, they were able to build on 13 years experience with telehealth. But they were also really able to respond to the community. They expanded behavioral health services considerably through telehealth, which was a direct response to all the stress that the pandemic was engendering in their communities and among their patients. Raul and his team kept their eyes on the most vulnerable. They facilitated access for foster children and families. And remarkably, they even extended COVID testing to the whole child welfare community, including workers and other agencies. So looking beyond their own doors and walls. I do want to note one achievement in particular, and that was a response that Aunt Martha's made to a request from the state. They opened the first in the country children's quarantine center for foster children who are exposed or affected by COVID. And so what we saw with this is they used resources in an unprecedented way to address unprecedented need. Now, when you meet Jackie Sinclair, and you hear about Joel Hall Dancers and Company, you'll see that Jackie kept her eye on the future with the rug literally swept out from under her. So Jackie was relatively new in her executive role. She was in the process of securing and renovating a new building for the company in collaboration with a donor. And she was forced to cancel the major fundraiser for the year, which was to be a performance celebrating Joel Hall's legacy. So at the beginning of the pandemic, she and her team started with a closed facility and limited funds. Well, Jackie and her group immediately took dance programming virtual, and that kept her community of dancers and leaders engaged from the very beginning. She also used the time to update her brand with messaging that's really guaranteed to make you feel energized and connected. And she doubled her focus on fundraising so that she could renovate her new space for a post-COVID program. Finally, she continued to build up her board. so that she'll have a strong governance structure to meet challenges ahead. So I want to close by saying, here's what I learned from Raul and Jackie. If you have a strong culture, you can draw on it to move mountains. When the pandemic hit, they built on their strengths. They moved ahead with a spirit of service and caring, and they drew on their decades of commitment to community empowerment and social justice. And at the same time, they were willing to try something new in response to new demands. So with that, Seth, I'll turn it back to you to introduce our guests.
Thank you so much, Linda. And it is exciting now to come to the two examples that you named as being grounded in social justice and truly rooted in a culture of trust and connection to handle these times successfully. In one case where their services were more naturally needed than ever, and we're going to come to that first with Raul Garza, and then in another case where their services were entirely upended by the social distancing and the new norms. And we'll talk then about Joel Halt Answers. So Raul Garza, let's start with you as president and CEO of Aunt Martha's Health and Wellness, where you are providing primary and family health care to over 105,000 children and adults on more than 600 communities throughout Illinois, and hear your story of how you were able to navigate through COVID.
Good afternoon, Seth, and thank you for inviting myself and Aunt Martha's to the conversation. I also want to thank Barbara, Kevin, and Linda for their support. I absolutely believe what Kevin touched on, that strong relationships matter, especially when we're all being challenged at this crazy time in our lives. And I also want to say that I'm honored to be on this panel with Jackie and the great work that Joel Halt Answers does. So, yeah, I think like any of us, back in March, I remember the day, it was March 11th. I'm watching CNN and I'm watching reports coming out of Southeast Asia about the pandemic. And it took me back to I think it was probably about 11 or 12 years ago when the organization was preparing for what was a pandemic back then. It was the bird flu. And I remember the exercise we went through to ensure that there were contingency plans and resources set aside. And fortunately, we never had to really draw on those because it didn't have the impact that was projected to have. But the exercise was meaningful because it was something we had to go through. And so it was that next day that I thought, well, this thing has the potential to be really serious. And so with that, we formed a team, like I'm sure a lot of organizations did, to really look at what Linda touched on, every component of the organization to try to determine how to mitigate the reduction of services or the loss of services. And the team put together a really good, comprehensive plan within probably less than a week. And from that point, it was really about making sure that our staff on the front line felt confident and comfortable in being in clinics, performing services for people that needed those services. And it was really the leadership that really supported the staff. If you don't know, I'm sure the bio says it here, but we're an organization of 850 employees throughout the state of Illinois, 35 sites, of which 2/3 of those are health clinics. We're also the only federally qualified health center in Illinois that has the distinction of being licensed by the Illinois Department of Children and Family Services. So when we take ourselves through an exercise like I described, I don't know that one could really pull off adopting that kind of contingency planning or exercise unless you have some core competencies within your organization, like some of the ones that were touched on in the introduction. Certainly one of them is that we've always had an entrepreneurial spirit, and really more so, I would say, in the last 20 years when we took a hard, sharp turn in the road and went from being a child welfare community-based services providing organization to becoming a federally qualified health center, because then we were able to bring really this integrated approach to care, which I'm a strong proponent of. I often say that there are many of us as providers in the community that often touch the same person or the same family. The challenge is that we're not talking to each other, and often there's an overlapping of services. But what's scarier is the underlapping of services, and then resources not really placed in the right place at the right time. So we always had that entrepreneurial spirit. We always had that commitment to diversity, and I think we live that not just in terms of the makeup of all our staff, but also with our leadership staff as well. Innovation. We've always really challenged ourselves to innovate and to try to find solutions for challenges that can be solved with technology and other innovative approaches. And then we've always been pretty nimble and agile to be able to adjust and adapt to whatever's coming at us, or often when maybe we're putting tension on a situation, to be able to adapt, from that response to that tension we're putting on the situation. And then finally, I think it's really about the strong culture that both Linda and Kevin have been speaking to. And that culture is really anchored by having strong leaders who are, again, diverse, who are committed, who are smart, who are courageous and caring. And really, when you're presented with the challenge that we all have been presented with, a pandemic, and I know we'll speak later in the program about social justice, if you have a lot of these core competencies in place, then it's probably not as much of a great challenge as it would be if you didn't have these characteristics in place. So I'll end it on that, so as not to dominate the time here, and allow for Jackie to step in. So thank you.
Thank you, Raul. And what I love about your answer is you gave us what you did post-COVID, but I think your greatest insight is what you did to set up for any challenge that comes your way, because you had a team that was ready to be nimble together and to be there for the front line. We're going to come now to Jackie Sinclair, who is the artistic director at Joel Hall Dancers, and they are enriching the lives of the community through dance performances and education. As you can imagine, this is at the very epicenter of the area in our economy that has been disrupted by COVID. And so, Jackie, we want to come to you and hear how you navigated through this truly difficult moment that was really challenging some of the core of what you would typically be doing.
Yes, thank you. Thank you all for having me. I'm excited to be here and share some of the great work that we've done. It hasn't been without challenge, that's for sure, but I will definitely accentuate a lot of what has already been said and speak about it from an artistic point of view. We are a jazz dance company, and so we are rooted in jazz, which is improvisation based. And so something happens and you pivot and you move, and that's what we're good at. I think too, the organization is 47 years old, and so we have a great history to fall back on, and we have a lot of challenges and mistakes to look back on as well. We think about those things and how we've survived and come through them, including a fire that destroyed the studio in the middle of a class. And we now look back at that event and we think about, the fire that destroyed the studio, and how did we resurrect and become resilient due to those challenges. And this will just be another one of the stories that we tell in the organization. Linda mentioned that I'm 2 years into artistic directorship. I've been with the organization for 30 years of those 47. But if you would have asked if this would have been my challenge coming into lead, I don't know, I might have thought a little differently about how I accepted the position. But, you look for the crack of light and then you just head toward it. And so I think that, in addition to the improvisation that is, deeply rooted in jazz, finding those moments to accentuate We did close the studio. We did close down all performances, but I shifted my focus to looking for a new space. I shifted my focus to a rebrand. I shifted my focus to virtual teaching instead. So it's not looking at what we can't do right now. It's looking at how we can be heading forward. I think that the thing that Raul mentioned is very similar. It is, artistry is the vehicle. So it is not necessarily about a performance or taking a class, teaching a class. That's the vehicle for our social purpose and for our social justice, and it always has been. So because of that, we will continue to move forward. This is a time for collective consciousness. So we've always been rooted in diversity before it was a buzzword. So before it was diversity, equity, inclusion, and there were workshops that we were supposed to take, there was everybody who represented that on the Marley. So the Marley is our podium. So we all have the vehicle to express, to present, to discuss, to preach, to share ideas, to challenge one another's thinking, but we all do it in different ways. So the longevity and the moving forward from this pandemic is because it is valid. The work is valid. It is healing. And I know that 100% without a doubt. And so Raul and his organization heals, my organization heals. And when you have a 100% commitment and belief that what you are doing is good for the community and it heals and it has an impact, and you've seen that it makes change, you will continue forward. When you are unclear about your path, your spirit is not right, you're not walking your soul's journey, it gets fuzzy. It gets fuzzy, and we fall in and out of that. But now is that period of time to reestablish what our soul's journeys are. And again, then to come together collectively and say, there are millions of people that are not walking their path. And how can we collectively do that? So where I see us going forward now with Joel Hall Dancers Center is that we have done that in our community for a very, very long time. But we've done that within the people who have come through the studio doors, within those who have come to the auditorium to see our performances. But now is a new day. And the work that we have is just getting started. It is not being diminished. So the light is not dimming on us. We need to shine even brighter because of this collective consciousness that needs to now be addressed. And to
Thank you. Oh.
There too.
I didn't mean to cut you off. Please finish, Jackie.
No, I'm good. I was finished. Thanks.
Well, I mean, truly, thank you. I think that your points complemented Raul so well because he shared how you build the team, how you set up, how you have that readiness from an organizational perspective. And you're complementing that with that depth of why. What's our purpose? How are we going to make a difference? And to be almost open on the vehicle, right? To say, you know, we're going to be constantly evolving on how we make that difference. And then when COVID hits, it just becomes, okay, what's the future? How do we use this as a way, as hard as it is, to begin testing out and building that future now, because it's almost presenting an opportunity to test because you know you have to change in these contexts. And so where do you go? And so I just want to thank both of you because you've presented what is an unbelievably hard topic of how do you navigate amidst this true, I mean, game-changing pandemic. And you've done it from the eyes open and the glass half full perspective, which is ultimately the sign of your leadership. We're going to come now to the other topic that is front and center for all of us. And I want to be clear that this topic is not new, but that we as a country are finally reckoning with it after the murder of George Floyd. We are continuing to reckon with it today after the failure of justice for Breonna Taylor and her family. And so this is a topic that has always been a core focus for the social sector, but it is raised in a new way and at a new sense of urgency. And all organizations that are in this work are thinking even more deeply about what does that mean for the work that we do. And we want to start with you, Barbara Lumpkin, because you have held highly profile leadership roles in very diverse settings, including financial services, government, and the nonprofit sectors. And you have learned firsthand the importance and value of forging and maintaining equity and inclusion across all of our spaces, including our workplaces. And so, Barbara, let me turn it over to you.
Thank you, Seth, and thanks everyone for joining us today. It certainly is a pleasure to just speak for a few moments on a very, very important topic. First off, I'd like to start off with just sharing some current day innovative efforts that's underway, which are designed to provide investments into some of our underserved communities. Because certainly you can talk about standing for racial justice in a number of ways and practically all day because of the kinds of things that we are wrestling with. The city, for instance, has established a neighborhood opportunity fund. JP Morgan Chase has invested, $40 million. BMO Harris Bank has large investor, 10 million plus in Invest Southwest. And the newly formed Chicago Regional Growth Corporation was formed to serve as a catalyst to help spur regional economic growth. Now, this, of course, just represents just a handful of things that's going on that our leaders quickly had to pivot, put together, and to address the issue of a long-standing problem, which is the inequitable distribution of resources that we know dates back more than 400 years. So the issue of dramatic racial injustices simply just did not start in 2020. They began many, many years ago, and they have occurred time and time again. We see things happening repeatedly where we feel justice would swing one way, and certainly it went to another. So sadly, our most prominent nation, which is our own, is gripped with two major pandemics, as we have commonly said in the communities. One of systemic racism, coupled with that of the real pandemic of COVID-19. Now, the first has fostered generational strife, despair, and disfavor, and the lack of investments in communities of color for decades. Differences have prevailed in housing, healthcare, education, employment, economic development, and just experiencing the basic rights as a member of a society in a free and thoughtful way. Now, while our local and national leaders wrestled with the impact of COVID-19, the world was actually exposed to Lady Justice's lack of blindness. It suddenly came to light that within the thought of we the people, it was highlighted that the balance of her most infamous scales were in many ways tipped towards disfavor of those of color, just as regulations relative to one's basic rights were omitted or often subject to multiple sets of interpretation. As a result of the events of 2020 alone, we all witnessed a multitude of voices stand and march together against decades of systemic racism, demanding change, cheering heart to heart and soul to soul, knowing that our children and all future generations were watching. Aunt Martha's and Joel Hall Dance Center are but two wonderful examples, and I'm very proud to share an audience with them today because Raul and Jackie has used their respective lens, their talents and compassion to lead two very different organizations through incredible challenges, all the while driving results and impacting change. Raul and Jackie are two pioneering leaders that continue to lead from the front, well before the cameras were rolling. Now to just segue to the importance of forging equity and inclusion in the workplace. And just some things that I have used over time or some things that I've shared with people over time that I think would be helpful. Number one, dare to ensure that your entire team is positioned to lead. Many times people feel encumbered in their roles and they don't have the bandwidth or the comfort zone, or they need in a bit more tutelage in this area, that area. So I would say comb every sector, every inch of the sector that you're in to engage the best in class. And then also ensure that as a leader, you yourself embody the mission of the organization. I will venture to say, and I've always thought this to be, in my case, leadership is a privilege, not an assumption. I repeat that, leadership is a privilege, not an assumption. We have to work to create, as leaders, welcoming environments, making certain that we're listening, making certain that we do not become a selective listener, making certain that we are not allowing people to feel invisible or devalued, and to make certain that we hear all voices. Now, just a quick example is one individual makes a statement or a suggestion at a meeting, and it just rolls on past. Following along, someone else who is probably more familiar in that room makes the same statement and is welcomed with open arms. We've seen it time and time again. We know it happens. So let's just make certain that we do not encourage such activity, and that we ourselves as leaders make certain that we are taking the opportunity to engage and empower our individuals to speak. The other is make certain that you're taking deliberate steps to ensure that all policies, procedures, practices that you have under your purview do not include embedded biases, nor does it tilt, favor, nor harbor hints of oppression or judgment. Oftentimes, just as some of the programs I mentioned before that our leaders have put in place to spur economic development, many of these programs will fall on deaf ears if in fact we are still applying them in the same method that we have in the past, using the same policies and procedures and the same decisions around lending and housing and all those sorts of things. These programs will be all for naught. So it is up to all of us to see that we are forever filtering and using the lens that Jackie and Raul use every day to ensure that the work that they do equitably gets to those individuals who needs it. And of course, it is major important to communicate early and often across the organization. Most people will say, we'll take this down the organization. I say across the organization, because everyone needs to feel that they are an equal partner and they are adequately and equally engaged and respected. And as a leader, it's your charge to remain level-headed. If people see you freaking out, they obviously are already at the windowsill. So we want to make certain that we are leading from the front. We are making certain that we are engaging individuals in a thoughtful way. And I hope that all of us will take advantage of this moment in our history to simply sit down with the brightest and the best around us and call upon our leaders, both public and private, to conduct a comprehensive review of all operating procedures, standing practices, rules, regulations, bylaws that's on our books that currently address us all. We see it repeatedly, how some of the laws on the books that's been there for years, they do not necessarily address current day practices, just as the way we conduct meetings do not happen in the way that we've done them in the past. History is evolving, life is changing, and I think as leaders, we need to be at the front of that work and ensure that we're looking at it from a lens where everybody is treated fairly, everyone is respected, and everybody has an opportunity to exercise their God-given right as being respected in this society. Seth?
Thank you so much, Barbara, for that powerful entry into this topic. I just want to say as we come to Raul on this, that what you've outlined is the all-encompassing nature of this topic if we take it seriously. It's about our procedures. It's about how we lead with inclusion. It's about how we look at all of our communications. It's about how we overhaul with an understanding that everything we've done has bias, and we need to be as serious about removing those as we are not serious about how those get embedded. And so I want to come now to Raul Garza, who has been a leader on this topic, much like the first topic we talked about. This is something that he has led on for decades, and so was ready But even amidst an organization and a leader that cares deeply and has been at the forefront, this moment has still been very meaningful. It's led to a new level of communication, new level of focus. And so, Raul, let's come to you and hear how you've approached this, and then we'll come to Jackie.
Thank you, Seth. I appreciate how Barbara really framed the discussion around two pandemics. And although I'm confident that a vaccine will help with the coronavirus, it's not going to be as simple around racial justice. And so this is a conversation or a topic I can have a conversation with you about all afternoon. But I'm going to do my best to keep it within the 5 allotted minutes. And so as much as I can probably offer a prescribed set of principles and values that maybe drive an organization or individual to embrace racial equity, I think what I'd prefer to do is the case study methodology to offer like examples over the last several months that are real life examples. And I hope the audience find those more interesting than what I could offer as a list of things. So the Illinois Department of Children and Family Services approached Aunt Martha's within several weeks of the outbreak, or as we saw the pandemic expanding in Illinois. And it was really the former chief of staff, Denise, who came to us and said, hey, look, I think we've got a gap here. We've got foster children who are going to be COVID-19 positive, and their foster parents are not going to be able to care for them, or they might be in a residential placement in some other organization, and they might not be able to quarantine the kids. Can you guys come up with something that can help respond to this challenge? And so I got that deep and talented team of Aunt Martha's together, and within 48 hours, they came up with a concept called the Children's Quarantine Center. The purpose of the program was to allow DCFS-involved children, primarily foster children, to quarantine for COVID-19 for up to 14 days or longer if necessary. And so we had a program, a facility in the village of Midlothian, which is a south suburban community. And we soft piloted the program, a permitted use in the community. So it wasn't as though it was a zoning ordinance issue or we needed some kind of special use permit. We had been operating already, and we were going to convert it to a DCFS program that was meant to quarantine children, as I said. So we had a young lady who was at the program, and like a lot of kids in the DCFS system, they were abused, they were abandoned, or they're neglected. And as a result of that, they experienced trauma, just like this young lady did. And because she suffered from trauma, she wanted to leave the facility, and she was 19 years old. And unfortunately, the children cannot leave on their own. And so the staff is required to follow a protocol that gets the police department involved for her safety and really the community's safety. And so we did that. And of course, she didn't want to cooperate. And I should mention the young lady was African-American, did not want to cooperate, and the police tried to restrain her, and it resulted in an incident. And then the very next day, we heard from the chief of police that the village was not going to allow us to open up the program. Now, and specifically the mayor, those were his words. And I sat there and thought, when I got that feedback, well, it's not really the mayor's determination to decide whether we can open the program or not. And so I got our team together, and we really analyzed the situation and found that the village was in violation of the Fair Housing Act. It was in violation of the American Disabilities Act. And it was in violation of allowing the kids to quarantine who were COVID-19 positive. And the fourth thing that I strongly believe is that race probably played an issue, because as we all know, children in the DCFS system are primarily children of color, African-American children, and Latino children. And with that, I asked our attorneys to take the Village of Midlothian into federal court, and the purpose of that was to protect the rights of those kids. And so we find ourselves in court now. I think it's month 4 that we're going through discovery and litigation. But The point of the matter, and you're likely to see this published, as I know there's interest from the Chicago Tribune and ProPublica on this story. So you're likely to see this published, and you're likely to see me talk about it. This is a story about protecting the rights of kids for the three reasons I talked about, but then also because they're kids of color. And I can sit here and talk to you about how we embrace diversity and how we embrace equity. But at some point, I think to Barbara's point, when you talk about taking these values down and across the organization, there are points when you have to take it outside the organization. And that's what we did in this situation. And I'm confident we will prevail because the judge has issued a restraining order to restrain the village from coming in and disrupting the program. And really, he's only able to do that if he has a sense or there's evidence that some discrimination has taken place. And so the unfortunate issue here is that we have to pay lawyers to protect the rights of these kids. And we will do that if that's what's necessary. However, it shouldn't have to be that way because these kids are allowed to quarantine. That's one example. The second example is, and I'll make this quick, is that 10 days after George Floyd was killed, I had a meeting with some executives from a hospital and another organization that was meant to bring Aunt Martha's to the table because we were proposing to go into this community to open up a clinic based on the needs in the community. The needs that demonstrated there weren't enough resources in the community to serve the unserved and the underserved members of that community. And unfortunately, what we tend to see in our business, in our industry, is that it's territorial, it's competitive. Organizations sometimes feel that they own those patients, they own those community members. Well, so the purpose of the meeting was to allay those organizations and say, look, we're coming in here to collaborate. We're not coming in here to overlap what you're doing. The data shows that there's need here. And what ensued over the hour meeting with myself, our Chief Operating Officer, Audrey Pennington, who's a woman of color, African-American, with these 7 individuals who are all Caucasian, was a very racist experience. And I talked to Audrey about it after it was finished. And I said to Audrey, wow, that was really a racist experience. And I think what had me see it that way, through that lens at that time, was everything that I had heard and read the previous 10 days following the killing of George Floyd. It just really opened up my eyes in a different way. And so with that sitting on me, for the 3 hours I drove from where the meeting was back to Chicago, I made a commitment to myself that I would do an assessment of the partnerships we have, the associations we belong to, the state advisory committees we belong to, the commissions we belong to, and where we didn't see evident commitment to diversity, I was going to call that out. So whether that was an organization that we're part owner of outside of Aunt Martha's, where they have 10 executives that are all Caucasian, not one person of color. And why is that important? Because we are serving primarily people of color. And people of color have to be represented by leaders that are people of color. When you look at what's going on in healthcare, and I don't have to tell you about how disproportionate the pandemic has hit the African American and the Latino population, what I do want to point out, though, is that when you look at the healthcare executive level, it's only, depending on the studies that you look at, it's anywhere between 2 or 8% of those executive roles are filled by people of color. The correlation there is that you've got people of color being disproportionately affected, and you have healthcare executives that are primarily not people of color. And so that's got to be solved for. I was at an event about 3 weeks ago, and it was with Commissioner Dennis Steer, and it was a community event in Inglewood, and he invited us to come out, and we were distributing PPE because it's one of the hard-hit communities in Chicago. And he's such a gracious elected leader. He asked me to speak to the community, and I followed his remarks, which he said, you know, we've got to create opportunities to raise people up. And that is true. But when you do that, you have to create opportunities where people of color can go to. And those opportunities are in the C-suite. Because if you lead them down, you lead them out of you create an opportunity for them to come out of Inglewood or Lawndale, and then they get to that middle management level, and there's not an opportunity to serve in leadership, then what ends up happening is disproportionate care, exactly what we're experiencing right now. So I appreciate the opportunity to speak to this. I'm not, I'll pitch the website. If you go to our website, you'll see some of this information about both of these situations on our website. I really feel that it's not enough to demonstrate internally as a leader what you're doing in your organization. Sometimes you got to step out of your organization and be vocal about it. And of course, there's probably some risk associated with that. But I strongly believe as long as you're on the right side of the issue, then that's the action that has to happen. Otherwise, things won't change. And so I'm honored to have been able to spend at least a few minutes speaking on this topic. Thanks, Seth.
Thank you, Raul, and thank you for the powerful leadership on this topic. To your point, it is only the courageous that are going to help us move the needle. Anything less has been what has allowed and truly sanctioned so much of the white silence in particular that has allowed these topics. Jackie, we want to come to you and hear how this has come into your world, both inward and outward, with Joel Hall dancers.
We can't talk about jazz dance without talking about it as Black dance. Jazz dance is Black dance, and this is something that we've been battling within the organization in the Chicago community for a very long time, and that is the underrepresentation of a Black art form when we have a founder who's Black. And so how do we not see and acknowledge the voice and the experience of our founder, Joel Hall, because these are his experiences as a Black man in Chicago. The work comes through most of the choreography that the company does is Joel Hall choreography. And we'll be expanding on that voice as we move forward and get to another 47 years of the organization. But it primarily comes from his experiences. And so, the acknowledgement that jazz dance comes from oppression and struggle is something that we always have to start the class, the conversation, the rehearsal with, acknowledging where it came from. So as I was saying, the organization has seen that struggle where there are many white jazz choreographers who have codified the technique. And so, we hear more about their work, and we know that, access to legal systems and whatnot allows that to happen. So one of the things that we look forward to doing as we open up the hall, so Joel Hall is the founder, the hall is the brick and mortar, the new building that Linda was mentioning that we have. And the Joel Hall Dancers and Center is the institution. And so one of the things that I want to see as the vision moving forward in the hall is that we have a jazz lab and library that really starts to define some of those missing pieces and missing voices, to go back and start to say, this is the history of jazz from the Joel Hall perspective, from our organization's perspective. And where are those missing stories and where are those voices? Because as Barbara was mentioning, leadership is listening. It is not that I have all of the information and all of the knowledge and all the wherewithal and all the skill. I listen. I listen to the artists. I listen to the community. I listen to what is needed. And then I don't have to create anything new. I just provide what's needed. What do you need to heal? What does the community need? What does Chicago need? What do we as artists need? And that's basically the direction and the movement for the new location. So Linda mentioned that we were moving in the middle of a pandemic, which is, a miracle. It's a miracle that this is happening. We've got some great foundation support to help us find our way there. But the purpose is not for a shiny new building. It's not so we can have brand new floors and mirrors and we can have a nice eclectic place to be. The the reason for the move, which I started to investigate in 2014, is to stabilize the organization for the dancers. And what that means is providing a place and an opportunity for these voices to be heard, because it is about the voice. It is about all of the voices. You know, it is about, and especially when we're talking about jazz dance, it is about the Black voice. It is about how we experience the world, the city, walking through it with various shoes on. And so we have to open up, otherwise we have no art to create. We have no art to create if we're not investigating all of the voices and all of the experiences. Then we're narrowed down into, you know, the same one show that we would do over and over again. It is about challenging people to think differently, to be differently. You know, we will not be different if we don't think different. If I think the same every day, I will never be different. And those are the lessons that we teach in every class. So it's a daily way in which we walk through the world. So each class that they come through, they walk through the doors of the hall and they come in their full light with their individuality, with their voice. It is expected as an artist to cultivate that, to pull that out, not to diminish it, not to subdue it, not to not hear it, not to put it away. That is artistry, and that is where I believe our work is to be done, through artistry, in order to heal the work. It's not just, you know, Joel Hall created a piece with the title "We the People" back in 2008. It's not just choreographing work that has social impact or speaks to a social issue. It is the day-to-day healing for every student that comes through, and every student that is, or every audience member that is watching the performance. It is a day-to-day practice. So it's not speaking it here in a webinar. It's not just preaching it. You know, we use the Marley, which is the floor that we dance on. We use the Marley, the podium, the Marley. It's not just those opportunities. It's the day-to-day practice. It's the day-to-day practice of how we speak and our voices that will create some of the change. There's a lot, you know, there's a lot of history to study to see how we got to where we did. So we're dedicated to doing that in the new space, and then moving forward, how to cultivate those individual voices, because it is about people being heard.
Well, Jackie, Raul, Barbara, Linda, and Kevin, thank you. Your insights were phenomenal, and I think they ultimately all revolved around a common theme, which is constantly having that purpose, imbuing it in all that you do as a leader, and then constantly reflecting. And so that example of you driving back, Raul, and thinking about how you had witnessed an incident of racism, how you were going to take your own work to the next level, even as someone who has long held and cherished these views. I think it gives us all food for thought for, you know, what's that purpose? How do we imbue that? How do we constantly reflect on whether we are there yet? And all of us know that we have growth and that we can still be more courageous leaders on both of these topics, navigating through the change of COVID, and even more long-term and more urgently, navigating through the systemic injustice that is still very much on display in our country as we hold this webinar. Thank you, thank you, thank you, and thank you to everyone who's joined us. We look forward to continuing the conversations with all of you. Bye.
Bye-bye.